Peninsula with Kaiser Permanente. I am originally born and raised in Chicago. Grew up on the northwest side of Chicago in an area called, if anybody from Chicago knows the area, in a neighborhood called Logan Square, a little bit north of Humboldt Park. And Humboldt Park is the neighborhood, that area is where the great Jewish American author Saul Bellow grew up. And when I read his marvelous book, one of his first early big successful novel called The Adventures of Augie March, I said, I think I'm reading about the kind of life my father had when he was a young man, a kid. My grandparents were all immigrants from the Ukraine, all around Kiev. They left at the very beginning of the 20th century because of persecution, the fear of persecution, the opportunity to provide for their families. They came here, they had tough childhoods, they were by no means wealthy, but thank God they persevered, did well. My parents raised my sister and I. We both went to college, first in our family. My parents never even graduated high school, and went to the University of Michigan. I went to University of Chicago Medical School, did my pediatric residency at Northwestern, spent 2 years in the Navy in Virginia, came out here, and I've been living here for 40-plus years, 44 years. Donna and I have 2 grown children, 3 grandchildren, and since I retired, I'm able to do things, more fully participate in Jewish community organizations, a number of them. And one of the more interesting ones, non-Jewish organization, is an Interfaith Speakers Bureau that's run by the Islamic Networks Group, which is headquartered in San Jose. So I've spoken at high schools and colleges widely in the Bay Area. One reason one way I'll tell what kind of an audience, if I would close my eyes and give a talk to an audience, one way I would know the religious affiliation of the people in the audience would be how many minutes I could speak before I started getting interrupted with questions. And if it's a Jewish audience, about 2 minutes. And often the questions are the most interesting part. So Pastor Connie or anybody else, Lionel, Dick, when you think it's time for me to stop and ask and just start answering questions, I'll be fine. I want to just show you, because this is kind of a random talk, and if I'm an expert on Judaism, we're all in big trouble. But I will tell you a little bit about what I know. This book, Eitz Chaim, Tree of Life, is the Chumash, the Bible, the part of the Hebrew Bible, the 5 books of Moses, interspersed with sections from other parts of the Bible. Now, you might say, well, doesn't he have it backward? No. As in Arabic and other languages, Hebrew, the language of the Bible, the Hebrew Bible, is written from right to left, as you know, and it is, so we read books from the back to the front by our standards. So here I am in the back of the book, and I open it, and the first book is Genesis, Bereshit in Hebrew. Begins in the beginning, as you all know. 5 books, the last one being Deuteronomy. There's Exodus, the story of the liberation of Jews from bondage in Egypt. Leviticus, where the 10 Commandments, the story of Moses on Sinai and the 10 Commandments, is explicated. It's a little earlier at sometimes. And then Numbers and Deuteronomy, which is kind of a repetition. So I thought what I would do is just talk, because when I asked Pastor Connie how familiar the audience would be with the Jewish religion, should I do a Judaism 101? Or is the audience, as I suspect, probably knows more about Judaism in many respects than I do? Should I do Judaism 102? So I'm going to do this kind of 101 and a half, and maybe tell you things that I didn't know very well until I started doing my research for this talk. But I want to talk beyond the basics of the Jewish religion, which I think many of you are familiar with, certainly in the Christian tradition, the Judeo-Christian tradition, the Hebrew Bible, which is often referred to by Christians as the Old Testament, is something that there are many, many Christians can just close their eyes and recite long, long passages of the Bible far better than I can. But there is...
A simple question.
Yes.
What do you call the part that goes from Deuteronomy to the end of the Old Testament?
Okay. The whole thing, the 5 books of Moses, good question, 5 books of Moses plus all of the other books, and it's the books, the history books like Joshua, Kings, which tells the story, for example, of David and Solomon, the prophets, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Micah, and the other prophets, and then kind of the writings, for example, Psalms, Ecclesiastes, the Song of Solomon. It's a mixture of poetry and history. And so the whole thing together is called the Tanakh, T-A-N-A, hard K-H, Tanakh. As in Arabic and German and other languages, there's a very guttural K or C sound. Yeah. It's, if you're Jewish, you know how and you go to Hebrew school, you learn that. In the Arabic language, or people who know the Arabic language for religious purposes know how to say that. It's also there in German, which means it's in Yiddish as well. Okay, but the most important prayer, and this is kind of now a random selection of topics. The most important prayer, if you had asked a religious Jew what's the most important prayer in the Jewish religion, they would say it's the Shema, which is found in the book of Deuteronomy. In the Chumash. Chumash is a word for 5. It's the 5 books of Moses. Okay. And it starts, and it's said in every Shabbat, every Sabbath, comes from the word for 7, Shabbat, Shavah. It's the 7th day of the week. It's the day where God rested after creating the heavens and the earth in 6 days. Some of which I'm sure he's saying, now why did I do that? But
what are the verse numbers for that?
I'm sorry?
What are the verse numbers?
Yeah, what are the verse numbers?
Here, this is, the Shema is in Deuteronomy, the 6th chapter.
Deuteronomy 6th chapter.
Yes. So, and it's very interesting because this book is a relatively modern, recent translation into English of the Hebrew. And when I read it, I say, wait a minute, that's not the way I learned it. That isn't exactly the same words that I learned. And so I have a hard time with this sometimes. Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. Now, since Arabic and Hebrew are cognate languages, people who are really good at speaking Arabic, for whom it's their native language, can probably kind of make out some of the words. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. And that encapsulates, perhaps, the chief religious message that Jews brought to the world, which is monotheism. There is one God, the creator of the heavens and the earth. And Jews have been arguing about that for X number of thousands of years since then. But, it goes, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart. And every Jewish kid who goes to Hebrew school knows this, and they can close their eyes and they can say it. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your might. You shall keep these words in your heart. Now I'm kind of jumping from this translation to the one I learned. You shall keep these words in your heart. You shall teach them diligently unto thy children. You shall recite them when you are in your house and when you are on the way, when you lie down and when you get up. You shall bind them as a sign upon your hand and let them serve as frontlets on your forehead. You shall inscribe them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. Now, when it says here, bind them as a sign on your hand, If you've seen photos or paintings of religious Jews praying, they will wrap bands, leather bands, around their arm and through their fingers. Those are called tefillin, from the word for prayer. And for frontlets between your eyes, because along with the tefillin, and this grew up, it's not told you exactly how you're supposed to do it here, but in Jewish tradition it's developed over the centuries. A little box with a prayer in it, the Shema, is right here on your forehead. Inscribe them on the doorpost of your house. You know what a mezuzah is. I have one that I wear. I've been wearing this particular mezuzah, I think, for about almost 60 years. But you have one on the doorpost of your house. You go into if you're in a neighborhood and you're looking for somebody's address, a Jewish friend, and you're not exactly sure, maybe it's late at night, you go to the door, and if you see the mezuzah, you know you're in the right place. If you don't see a mezuzah, you say, I think maybe it's next door. Okay. So that's what they mean by doorposts of your house and on your gates. Okay. There is another portion of the Bible of the Chumash that I wanted to mention to you. It's in Exodus chapter 34. Now, in the Jewish yearly calendar, if you ask Jewish people what is the most important Jewish holiday of the year, they would say it's probably in the fall, the high holidays. That's for Jews who never go to a synagogue any other time of the year. They may still go to temple on the high holidays, which is the New Year, Yom Kippur, Rosh Hashanah, the head of the year, and Yom Kippur, which comes 10 days later, which is the Day of Repentance. It's during this period, it's when Jews ask God to forgive their sins and to grant them inscription in the book of life. So on the holiday of Yom Kippur, which is a day of solemn prayer, it's a fast day, the services, probably if you go from beginning to end, you're probably in the synagogue for 15 hours. And the prayers get very fervent, because the less Jews go to temple, probably the more they feel they have to ask for forgiveness at one time. So it gets pretty fervent. And there is a prayer that's repeated over and over and over again in each portion of the service on Yom Kippur. And it's referred to as the 13 attributes of God. And here it is. In Exodus 34, Moses is on Mount Sinai. And remember, there's this thing where Moses asks God to please show me your presence. And in some way, mystical way, he sees God's presence. And he stood with him there and proclaimed the name Lord. Nobody really knows what the name of God is. It was said on Yom Kippur in the temple in Jerusalem by the high priest. But the high priests aren't around anymore. Nobody knows the true name of God. So we refer to it as the name Hashem, or the Lord Adonai. It's just a stand-in for whatever the true name of God is. And if you look in the Hebrew, it's a tetragram. It's 4 letters, but that does not. And if you look it out and you sound it out, you can say it's Jehovah. And so an awful lot of people in Christian tradition, Jehovah has become kind of understood as the name of God among some Christians, but that's not really the name. It's a mystical tetragram. The Lord passed before him, that's Moses, and proclaimed, the Lord, Adonai, Adonai, a God compassionate and gracious, slow to anger, abounding in kindness and faithfulness, extending kindness to the 1,000th generation, forgiving iniquity, transgression, and sin. Now that's the part that's repeated over and over again on the high holidays, on Yom Kippur. And in Muslim tradition, how is the Lord, God, referred to? What's the first thing? Allah, the merciful and compassionate, right?
But we learn from the Jews.
Yeah. Why not?
Yeah,
Okay. But now here's, and this is sung. Adonai, Adonai, El Rachum v'Chanun, Erech Apayim, Rav Chesed v'Emet. But then, kind of that's where they end, this part, forgiving iniquity, transgression, and sin. The part that they leave out in the Jewish liturgy is just the rest of it. Yet he does not remit all punishment, but visits the iniquity of parents upon children and children's children, upon the third and fourth generation. You can see why that's kind of left out. Yeah, that's the not so nice part of this is mind your P's and Q's, or it's not just you who's going to suffer. I'm going to visit it on your grandchildren and your great-grandchildren. And if you really think about it from a sociologic standpoint, it's unfortunate that the sins of one generation, the mistakes that one generation makes, have consequences for the next generation and for 2 or 3 generations. We see that all the time, unfortunately. So that's one thing I wanted to read to you. One more is something that's not in the Bible, but it has the number 13, so it made me think of that. There was, perhaps, just raise your hand and you can say, who was probably the greatest Jewish figure from the time of, well, there's this phrase, from Moses until Moses, there is no one like unto Moses. And so in the Middle Ages, who is the greatest Jewish personage of the Middle Age? Maimonides. His name was Moshe ben, the son of Maimon. That was his father's name. So made into the Greek form, it's Maimonides. He was not just a secular personage. He was a physician. He was a great physician, one of the great physicians of the Middle Ages. He was the physician to the Sultan's court in Egypt. He was a philosopher, wrote books of philosophy. He was a great religious figure in the sense of he made a compilation of Jewish law and commentary on Jewish law called Mishnah Torah. Torah being another name for the 5 books of Moses, the Torah, the teachings. So the 5 books of Moses, the Torah, Mishnah Torah, commentaries and interpretation upon the Torah. And one of the things he's famous for is a statement saying, what are the attributes, what are the 13 principles of the Jewish faith? And again, it's a matter of interpretation. But, okay, I've got God's 13 attributes. And this is Maimonides' 13 principles of the Jewish faith. Belief in the existence of the Creator, who is perfect in every manner of existence and is the primary cause of all that exists. This is just one translation. The belief in God's absolute and unparalleled unity. Remember, I said it was monotheism. So that's a statement of monotheism. And then in Hebrew, I remember this because it's in some of the prayers I learned in Hebrew school. Ein lo demus haguf, the ein o guf, belief in God's non-corporeality. I mean, he's not a figure. He's not a statue. He's not an idol or an icon. He's spirit. Nor that he will be affected by any physical occurrences such as movement or rest or dwelling. Believes in God's eternity. There's no beginning. There's no ending. The imperative to worship God exclusively and no foreign false gods. Something which is important because the Jews didn't do such a good job back in the time of the ancient Israelites in following that. Belief that God communicates with man through prophecy. This whole list of Jewish prophets. The belief in the primacy of the prophecy of Moses, our teacher. Belief in the divine origin of the Torah as it was given to Moses by God on Mount Sinai. The belief in the immutability of the Torah. It's not going to change. Isn't subject to editing or revision. The belief in God's omniscience and providence. The belief in divine reward and retribution. The belief in Maud, that famous character on the TV show? God will get you for that. Okay. The belief in the arrival of the Messiah and the Messianic era. The belief in the resurrection of the dead. Now, yes, Judaism is at its core, as its origin, a messianic religion, but the interpretation of the Messiah, what the Messiah means, is very different in Christianity and Judaism, and Jews do not believe that the Messiah has come yet. And then the last, belief in the resurrection of the dead, you can find that in the Torah, in some of the books of the prophets, but as I've said over and over when I give my talks, Jews just don't spend a lot of time worrying about it. We are not focused on the next world in our everyday lives. Judaism is very much a this worldly religion. It is not focused on the next life. You can find all kinds of references in Judaism about the world to come. In fact, I was just having a discussion with my rabbis a while ago. Is what does it take to earn a place in the world to come? And it means to be a righteous person, to follow the mitzvot, the laws of the Torah, and to be, most of all, probably among them, to pursue justice, to pursue the repair of the world, to exhibit loving kindness. It's a phrase that sticks in my mind is when the temple was destroyed by the Romans in 70 Common Era, and a student of one of the great sages of the era, one of the great rabbis of that time, said, "Rab, what will we do now? How will the Jewish people be saved on Yom Kippur since there's no temple and no more high priests?" And his answer was, through acts of loving kindness. So pursue justice. So the question is, do you have to be Jewish to earn a place in the world to come? No. If you are a righteous person, showing loving kindness in your life, you will earn a place in the world to come as well. Before God got the law, God gave the law to Moses on Mount Sinai, who was one of the most righteous people before Abraham was Noah. And there were laws, kind of an abbreviated version of the Ten Commandments that was called the laws of Noah. And if you follow that, it does not make any difference what your religion is. You will earn a place in the world to come. But the world to come hasn't come yet, according to Jewish tradition. Now, I've got 5 more minutes, right? Let me ask. I'm going to stop. I'm going to ask for questions.
Could you tell us briefly the difference in the Orthodox, Conservative, and
Good.
Reform
It was one of the things I was going to do.
and the Reconstructions?
Yeah. I'm sorry, the reasons?
The Reconstructions tradition?
Okay. Yes. For a long, long time, say until, well, it's not entirely true, but until the 19th century, Judaism was Orthodox Judaism, although that's a fascinating subject. But you start talking about Hasidic Judaism, Kabbalistic Judaism, which came around in the Middle Ages. I got one more thing I'll have to tell you. If you were Jewish, there was no difference. Everybody was Orthodox by what we call today's standards. Today, even saying Orthodox doesn't tell the whole story, because there's modern Orthodox, there's traditional Orthodox, there's ultra-Orthodox. But in the 19th century, with the Enlightenment, with the Renaissance and the Enlightenment in Western Europe, not Eastern Europe, but in Western Europe, Jews, in particular in Germany, developed a reformed kind of Judaism, which just jettisoned a tremendous amount of the laws. Said, this is ancient stuff, this is outmoded. Let's just find the essence of Judaism. Moses Mendelssohn was one of the chief figures in Germany of the Reform movement. Of course, Moses Mendelssohn's grandchildren, Felix Mendelssohn, the great composer, they weren't Jewish anymore. They all got baptized. Because in Germany, in a lot of places in Europe, if you wanted to advance socially, you got baptized. And for somebody who was very ambitious and really had the talent and wanted to climb, many got baptized. And then there was kind of a reaction against Reform Judaism. It went too far. No Hebrew. There were organs in the synagogues. People didn't wear the skull cap. They didn't wear the prayer shawl, the tallis. They often, it was sort of like, well, what, are you Jewish? Yes. What does that mean? Well, it's just sort of a slightly different kind of Protestant church. I mean, and for the social, I don't mean that in any way as a jibe, but for those who accept a jibe against ultra-assimilationist Jews who just didn't want anybody to think they were really Jewish, that there was anything wrong with that, that maybe some don't think there's something wrong with that. Oh, well, we're just sort of slightly different kind of Protestant church. Very big in San Francisco, and I'm making a joke about it. Reconstructionist from a Rabbi Mordecai Kaplan. And I'm not sure I understand Reconstructionists, but I asked one of my Reconstructionist friends, he said, put a great emphasis on the cultural nature of Judaism. Because Judaism isn't just a religion, or Jewish identity is not just a religion. It's a culture, it's a history, it's a civilization, it's a people, a peoplehood. The Jewish people, Am Yisrael, Jewish peoplehood, that Jews anywhere in the world are part of the same people. Even if you converted yesterday, you are part of the same people, and you were there, your soul was there at Sinai, which is a folk belief, and it doesn't make any difference what part of the world it is. You can go into a synagogue anywhere in the world, and the same portion of the Torah will be read on Saturday morning in that synagogue. Anywhere. You can go to India. You can go anywhere in Europe. You can go anywhere, and it'll be the same portion of the Torah. So we're conservative, which is conservative Jews. It's kind of in the middle. Maybe not quite as orthodox as the Orthodox, not as quite as strict as the Orthodox, but Reform went too far. However, in the late 20th century, Reform Judaism has changed. I think that Lionel, Dick, you probably tell me if you think I'm right. Reform Judaism has probably come back toward the middle. There's a lot more Hebrew. I go to Beth Am from time to time, which is the big Reform temple not far from me, not far from the Kol Emet, the synagogue I go to. A lot more Hebrew than there used to be. It's no longer unusual to see people wearing a tallis or a skull cap, a kippah. And there's not, I would not feel anywhere there's that much difference. Again, I close my eyes and I wouldn't really know too much about whether this is a Reform or a conservative synagogue. I would know the difference between a conservative and an Orthodox synagogue probably more than I would between a conservative and a Reform.
What would be the biggest difference?
Between the conservative, oh my God. First of all, they would say, what's wrong with you? What kind of a Jew are you? You don't put the tefillin on? Do you keep kosher at home? Well, not so much. What's wrong with you? Do you observe the Sabbath rigorously in all respects? Well, I really do try to avoid doing some things on Saturday, from Friday night until Saturday night. But not quite enough that an Orthodox person would be satisfied with that. I see Orthodox people in my neighborhood sometimes, and they walk to synagogue. You cannot ride. In some of the most, and you go to synagogue, the services are long, you put on the tefillin, and you don't even carry your prayer book or your prayer shawl to synagogue with you because there's a rabbinic prohibition against carrying. So they leave their prayer books and their prayer shawls at the synagogue. Now, however, if you can do things at home, you can lift your child up. You can pick your child up in your house, but you can't do it on the street. So Jews are very, very good at trying to find adaptions. It's rabbinic tradition of finding adaptions. If you have what's called an eruv, which means there's an enclosure of some sort around your community, and you go, well, you see those telephone poles? That's part of the eruv. No, there's only one place that there isn't something that we could call an enclosure. It goes across the street. So Jewish communities have gotten permission from the city council to put a wire across the one place where there's a gap in the wall, essentially like a wall, which makes it into a home. Because I've seen Orthodox Jewish folks on the street